So, welcome to episode 79 of 10 Minute Record Reviews. And today we're going to talk about Sinead O'Connor's follow-up album to her debut, which was 1990's I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got. Like anything Sinead O'Connor does, this album is powerful, it's personal, it's emotional, it's moving, it's drawn out of the pain of the artist herself, but it's also incredibly catchy, wonderfully well-written, beautiful music. What you have here is kind of a synthesis of singer-songwriter and pop star. And there's a tension between the singer-songwriter pieces and in the confessional pieces and the pop star elements. Eventually, something would have to give, but here the effect is still totally glorious. It's not easy to understand Sinead O'Connor's work unless you understand her background and in particular her troubled relationship with the church and with Irish society in general. So she's born in '66. Her parents ultimately get divorced. When she's 13, in 1979, she leaves her mom and goes to live with her dad and his new wife. Her relationship with her mother was pretty complicated, and it actually forms the basis of a lot of the music in this album. She ends up getting in quite a lot of trouble, and she is sent to one of the Catholic Church's notorious Magdalene asylums for prostitutes, people who had gotten pregnant out of wedlock, and of course their children as well. Much like James Brown, she makes connections in prison which are going to be useful to her. She ends up meeting a guy called Colm Fairley, who was an arranger and general sort of musical dog's body composer, and the two of them formed a band called Tonton Macoute. They gig around Dublin and other parts of Ireland, and they attract some attention. She's signed by Ensign Records out of Dublin. She does a little bit of work with The Edge of U2. And then in 1987, she releases The Lion and the Cobra, which is a massive hit, goes gold in the States, is Grammy nominated, and establishes her as a major star. So it's in the context of that album that I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got is released a couple years later. In between The Lion and the Cobra and 1990, when she releases this album, her confidence as a songwriter has grown. Almost all the songs on here are her own compositions, with a couple of famous exceptions. Of course, Prince's Nothing Compares to You, which was the standout single from this record, and also a song called I'm Stretched in Your Grave, which is a song originally recorded by a band called Scullion in the late 70s, based on a lyric that had been transcribed from the Gaelic by the Irish poet Frank O'Connor. The album is largely concerned with her relationship with her mother. The title itself, I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got, is actually a quote from her mother from a dream that Sinead had about her mother. She has enormous credibility at that particular time in music. She's kind of the anti-Madonna. She deliberately refuses to have her sex appeal used to sell records. She's a very beautiful woman, but she consciously took steps, eschewed makeup, shaved her hair. It's all about the music. It was a mainstream album, but it was alternative in the sense that she was refusing to buy into the industry. She had notable spats around this time with Madonna, with Frank Sinatra, because despite the fact this album was nominated for 4 Grammys, she boycotted the ceremony. Previously, she'd said that she would not go to the States and play if they were going to play the national anthem of the United States at the concert ahead of time. There's a predictable kind of moral panic about this. Frank Sinatra gets involved and says he's going to, quote, kick her ass if he meets her, and so on. So, you know, Sinead was never going to play everyone's game. And in 1992, of course, spectacularly, she goes on Saturday Night Live and rips up a picture of the Pope. Again, bearing in mind her own experience directly with the Catholic Church, but also the fact that she knew about, and so many people who were active in the church knew about the sexual abuse of children, which was not to come out for another 7, 8, maybe 10 years after the Saturday Night Live incident. She pays a huge price for this, and basically her career is sidelined. She's non-personed, basically, in the United States. History has been kinder to her on this and really shown that she was right and prescient and was pointing out something that very few were willing to acknowledge at the time. Bipolar disorder is often mentioned with respect to Sinead, and she has that diagnosis. Certainly you'd have to say that some of the risk-taking that she undertook at this time professionally is probably fueled by that, but that's not to say that in any way her stances were unjustified or unreasonable, and she took an enormous amount of heat and was marginalized for what was really an act of bravery. So side one starts with Feels So Different, which is, of course, the song which begins with Reinhold Niebuhr's Serenity Prayer, you know, about accepting the things we can't change and changing the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference, and so on. This is a great lyric about coming to appreciate real love and real friendship. It's a superb vocal performance, a really talented and restrained use of her upper register, I think. Then there's the song I mentioned before, which is I Am Stretched in Your Grave, which is the one which takes the lyric which Frank O'Connor had transcribed. It's musically quite interesting. It's been called Celtic Funk. I mentioned James Brown earlier, and of course there's a sample of Funky Drummer with this sort of droning chant of a lyric over top. So it's kind of like Ireland meets the JBs, and the combination is terrific. Then we're on to another deeply personal song, which is Three Babies, a song about miscarriage and grieving. This is a subject which, you know, there aren't a lot of songs about, but impacts a lot of people very significantly. Then the first real hit of the album, which is The Emperor's New Clothes. The lyric itself is about all the judgment she received as a young single mother during her rise to fame. It's a brilliant song. It's got a fantastic hook in the chorus where, you know, she says, "I really didn't mean to," which to me is the single best little musical moment of the album. Luckily, she does that a lot. And then a really interesting song called Black Boys on Mopeds. It's just her singing with a very simple acoustic accompaniment. It's a lament on the age of Margaret Thatcher in general, but it's also specifically about the death of Colin Roach. Colin Roach was a black kid who had died a number of years before in the UK in suspicious circumstances. Sinead's lyric is all about justice for the family and is very much a Black Lives Matter moment 25 years ahead of its time. It's a great way to end side one, and what an album side that is. Side two starts with Nothing Compares to You. Such a great song. For me, and I think for most people, this will always be the definitive version, Sinead's version. It's a song with a really interesting history. Prince, of course, was somebody of many, many talents and a truly restless spirit. And while his own career was building in the 1980s, he had a number of other side projects going, and one of them was Morris Day and the Time, who appear in Purple Rain. All of their music was written by Prince. And on the strength of Purple Rain and all of the publicity they had, Morris Day then leaves to go out on his own as a solo artist. Prince gathers the remaining members of Morris Day and the Time, adds a couple other people, and reconstitutes them as a group called The Family. In the studio, Prince plays many, if not most, of the instruments, does a lot of the background singing, is writing all the songs. He gives some bogus songwriting credits to other people, but he's basically the force behind all of the music. And they do a version of this song on their debut album. It's actually a really good version. It's worth listening to, worth picking up. And Prince, of course, has his own versions as well. But Sinead had heard the version on the Family's debut album, and she records it. She never asked Prince about recording it. According to her, later on they met up after the song had been released, and they actually came to blows over this. Not so much over the use of the song as the fact that he began to lecture her about using bad language in public, and she took exception to that, and subsequently in other interviews she kind of downplayed that. But there's a lasting image burned in my brain of Prince and Sinead having a toe-to-toe, which isn't going to go away anytime soon. Anyway, enough of the backstory on that. It's a phenomenal rendition, a very tough musical moment to top, and clearly the high point of this record. Then there's a song called Jump in the River, which is co-written with a guy called Marco Perroni, who was actually part of Adam and the Ants. It's a song about a lusty rock and roll love affair, which is not what you would say about almost anything else on here. And it's a great tune. And then we have a song fairly explicitly about her mother, which is You Cause As Much Sorrow, the unspoken part being Dead as Alive. Then we're on to The Last Day of Our Acquaintance, the lyrical declaration of the end of a relationship. And then the final piece is this quiet, beautiful, kind of chilling a cappella number, which is the quote from her dream about her mother, I do not want what I haven't got. And it is, if anything, like a chanted prayer. This song is beautiful and brave, much like the singer herself, and a wonderful coda to a really powerful album that takes you through most of the human emotions, at least most of the troubling human emotions. So I came to review this album on the strength of my earlier impressions of it, which were, formed in around 1990, when, frankly, this wasn't the kind of music I was into very much. And I had a kind of a lukewarm feeling about it. I knew there was a big hit but I hadn't really spent a lot of time delving into it. And I have to say, I was absolutely blown away by this record and by the connection that she has with her own lyrics and the connection that she forms with the listener. The music is great. It's totally varied. Again, you've got this tension between pop star and singer-songwriter and confessional, but also, so inward looking, but also outward looking. The intensity is sometimes a little much for me, but I think that's kind of an example of how true giftedness walks hand in hand, sometimes a little bit of mental illness on a bit of a tightrope. And the net result here is absolutely beautiful. It's a courageous album, it's a beautiful album, and for me it's 5 out of 5 stars.